Hello, good afternoon. Thank you so much for coming today online, on Zoom, and in person today to the Center for Latin American Arts at UTRGV. My name is Dr. Catherine Moore McCallan, and I'm excited to introduce to you our visiting artists from the exhibition Uncovered Spaces. Yesterday we had a beautiful opening reception at the IMAS, and tomorrow we're planning more in the gallery events, so please join us from 10 to 1 tomorrow. And today we're hosting the Artist Roundtable, titled Navigating Your Own Space, Artistic Identity and Social Interactions in the Artist Practice. And we'll be hearing from each of the artists speaking about the work that they have in Uncovered Spaces and speaking about their practice. And we also wanted to encourage our students to please share their questions, any information about your own practice that you would love insight and input on from our visiting artist. And we'll open up the discussion for a very casual conversation, anything you want to talk about and anything you'd like to hear about from the artists. We wanted to encourage student participation both on Zoom and in person. So we look forward to hearing from you. And our artists today are Zach Thompson, and also our scholars, our art historian Rebecca Van Diver, and artist Linda Behar, artist Jana Harper, artist Margarita Cabrera, and artist Erica Diamond are all here today to visit with you and participate in this roundtable. So without further ado, each of our artists are going to speak for a few minutes about their work of art that's in Uncovered Spaces and their practice, and then we'll open up the discussions to our audience to have a nice conversation. Thank you for joining us.
I'll go first. Is my image up? I'm finding my image. So while we're pulling that up, I'll just say that in general, my work looks at the vital yet fleeting qualities of human contact. So this is my eggshell shirt, business casual, is the piece that I have in the exhibition. But it's actually born from a larger body of eggshell garments. So I'm a textile artist, or at least make textile-focused work. What I'm interested in is the ability for objects to tell stories, often kind of drawing from the intended functions of objects and how they have these like embedded histories. So my goal was to really find a way for a wearable garment to tell a story, but particularly a story of human physical interaction. So the one you see here in the catalog was an eggshell shirt for hugging, so it was meant to record a hug. So there's that intention that's part of the work. But I'm also looking at the materiality of eggshell and how it works a lot like our own skin. So the piece is essentially 2 layers of sheer tulle material, and between that are hand-stitched eggshell fragments. So the eggshell is both the thing that like holds and protects that egg body, but we also think of the eggshell as fragile. So to me, there's this metaphor of that sort of moments of interaction between people, the tenuous barriers, and the way that the eggshell kind of represents that. And I like to think of this garment as a way to become like a shared skin between 2 people, should they come in contact with one another. So when contact is made, so say I receive a hug, or I've done an eggshell glove for shaking hands, for instance, as well. When I come in contact with someone, the eggshells crack and they create a live imprint. But those shell fragments are then still kept within the garment, so it has like a memory. It's still there, it's just changed, much in the way that we change based on our interactions with other people. Should I say more, or just move along and then answer more questions?
Sure, but that sounds good.
Okay.
That was very cool.
Yeah. Good afternoon. My name is Margarita Cabrera. I want to thank Catherine McCallan and Helene Sotfoki Am I saying that right? Of course, the dean, the university here, and EMAS, it's such a pleasure to be here. What a magical night it was last night, to see all the students, to see all the faculty, the performance, and to just have really such a wonderful, positive energy in the space. And it's so, opposing what's really happening in the world. It's really fascinating to be in such privileged spaces, especially with, the situation in Ukraine, which is so hard not to mention and think about as we are having these wonderful cultural dialogues and sort of a peaceful effort, right, in the museum. So I think, being aware of our privilege and being aware of this space in which this dialogue is taking place is really important. And with that, I'd like to mention just a short land acknowledgement, because this cultural dialogue that we're bringing together is happening here in McAllen, but of course, this is the original land of the Hopi, the Sunni, the Cherokee, and the Cherokee, the traditional stewards of this land, and it's really important that we always find ways of deconstructing these colonizing systems that decentered those communities and those people, and it's really important that we continue to acknowledge that ourselves, right? I'm sharing this, but also in a very personal way, doing my own acknowledgement of privilege and my own work as I try to work against these personal colonizing tendencies. So thank you for letting me mention that, especially because this is a very peaceful work that we're all doing together, and the struggle for Indigenous rights is the struggle for immigrant rights. It's the struggle for all of our rights. And so thank you for letting me start with that. My name is Margarita Cabrera, as I mentioned, and I'm a Mexican artist, born in Mexico, working in the United States. My work aligns with others that are working with social engaged work, and I believe the arts have the ability to reflect what's going on in our environment, but also, most importantly, the ability to transform spaces, to create environments where people can have dignified ways of expressing themselves. And I think this show that we're bringing together is doing that very well. I'm very privileged to work with ASU students. I'm a faculty member at ASU, and I teach in the textile department, and I also teach public art. I do this through a critical social focus, right? Social justice focus. And I'm a lifelong student of two wonderful boys who teach me how to be a better person every day. That's my two sons. So that's a little bit about me. I'm delighted to have been invited to present the work that you see projected up here. The Space in Between project has been an ongoing project since 2010. And the project is inspired by a term, an Aztec term that was coined by Gloria Anzaldúa, Nepantla. Nepantla, it refers to a space in the middle, space, for me, the way I see it, space between cultures, space between geographical spaces, a space between languages, a space between friendship, breaths, thoughts, right? It's a space where everything can happen and anything can happen, where there's flux, where there's ritual, where there's the potential for change and the construction of new landscapes and new futures. That's the inspiration for this work. It's a collaborative work that takes the form of a sewing and an embroidery workshop, sculpture making workshop as well. It brings together immigrant communities from different parts of the United States, immigrants who have shared their very powerful and transformative border crossing stories. And we work together through an embroidery process, so there's a wonderful sharing of textile work and fiber work. And then we share the stories on the surface of very important material, which in this case is the Border Patrol uniform. And as artists, we're always transforming material, right? And we transform it from one form to another. So in this case, we're using material that has a very inherent quality, inherent meaning, inherent history, that to some people represent something very specific and to others something totally different. So we have communities who see the border and the division at the border as a symbol of control, symbol of power, symbol of safety. And then we have other communities who see the border as a violent space, a space where families are separated, a space where there's resistance, a space where there's possibility of death, a lot of death. So these are communities that have very opposing perspectives onto the same material, right? The uniform. And this project brings opposing perspectives together to work together, to establish relationships together, new ways of understanding the history of immigration, and bringing these communities together to transform the material together, right? To have dialogue, to have new relationships constructed. And so together, this material gets transformed into very different shapes, right? From a uniform that represents those very restricting symbols, now these pieces represent growth, they represent flourishment, they represent life, right? Landscape, nature. And so that's really important, that transformation of material in a collective process. That's really important for this project. And Space in Between has brought together communities from different Latin American countries, people who have crossed into the United States, telling our immigration story collectively on a national level, because we have several states represented here: North Carolina, Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, Pittsburgh, and currently a project that's taking form in San Antonio, Texas. And so it allows for a deeper understanding of the immigration issues from the perspective of an immigrant community, by way of honoring them, honoring their experience, honoring their place in this world, in this country, and by allowing ourselves to open up, and understand this history in a different way. So I'm really grateful because these projects happen successfully with the partnerships when they come together. So like I said, the university here, the museum, some of the galleries and collectors, the students, it really allows for a wonderful dialogue, right? And a good experience to exist. So I'm hoping that we can, really honor the people that are represented in this work. So I do play different roles. I'm an artist, activist, organizer, and in this case, I'm representing hundreds of people in this work. It's not just my participation in my work. It is the work of many people, and by extension, their families, and by extension, other immigrants that are also getting ready to come to this country or cross other borders across the world. I think that's good. Thank you so much for listening.
Amazing. What an honor to be here with you and with all of these artists. I feel really grateful to be here. And thanks to Catherine and Rahala. Is it close enough?
Yeah, it's just really quiet. Sorry.
Oh, okay. Thank you. I'm just thanking everybody. I'm feeling grateful. But also, I just want to thank everyone, the IMAS Museum. I see Anne and all of the students and faculty that participated in both the performance last night and also in the film project that we did in Brownsville and Edinburg. Carlos, you're a magician, and I just appreciate you so much. Thank you for all of your help. So I'm Jana Harper, and I've worked on 2 projects, 2 community engaged projects since I've been here. And I would say that the themes in my work that come up again and again, and you've heard me talk about this, so I don't want to take up too much time, really, are the burdens that we carry as humans, the intergenerational burdens that we carry, asking questions about truth. What is the truth ever? There are so many different ways to define that and to ask and answer that question. And more I'm asking questions about recognition. I'm a member of an unrecognized Indian tribe in Michigan, the Mackinac Band of Ottawa and Chippewa Indians, and we do not have federal recognition. And so that question or that metaphor of recognition is something I'm really curious about. How do we recognize each other as humans, human to human? How do we recognize our ancestors and how do they recognize us? How do objects embody a sense of animacy? How do plants and animals recognize one another? I mean, all of these interconnected questions about recognition are things that come up for me again and again. And so both of these two projects that we worked on, essentially for me, are about that and about asking those questions. So inviting this community to name their ancestors in two different forms. One, taking a card out of the playbook of Oscar Munoz, and I need to shout out to him because, writing in warm water on pavement is a direct pull from him. And in the same way that Margarita is naming the land, naming those people that inspire us and establishing our lineage and saying who we are taking our ideas from and borrowing from, super important, and that borrowing is natural and it's important, but we need to also, acknowledge that. So thank you, Oscar Munoz, who I don't know, but I wish I did because he's brilliant. The naming and the writing of the names, watching that evaporation process, and then last night being in the space, right, establishing our positionality between those that came before us and those that came after us. Doing that really allows us to understand our responsibility and our responsibility on this plane in this slice of humanity, because we're responsible to all those that came before and we're responsible to all of those that are coming after. And I think that when we forget that, when we sort of act as independent agents and we disassociate ourselves with that responsibility, that's when we see irresponsible, individualistic behaviors that lead to the problems that we're seeing in the world that Margarita is mentioning. And so for all of us to recognize and place ourselves, essentially what we've done last night together and what we did in the video is remind ourselves of our space and our responsibility. So I thank you from the bottom of my heart for participating in the performance last night. I can't wait to see the pictures. I have only seen like 2 pictures, but I can tell you that the experience that I had with the group was really powerful. The hour that we spent together in preparation, you may have noticed last night that everyone was facing a slightly different direction. And what I asked was that everyone face the cardinal direction that they felt like would honor their particular set of ancestors. For many people, they had to make a choice, because there are different stories that are behind us. Many people faced the south, I faced the north, some faced east or west, but I think that what I was hoping for and what I really feel like we achieved last night was more akin to ceremony than to theater. And that was also really important, that the connection that we were establishing was quite real. And the stories that I'm hearing from people last night, I'm just really touched. Rahala has a story about what she felt standing in the space, and it directly connected to one of the exercises that we were doing in preparation. So I won't say too much more, but I'm just really deeply, deeply touched to have experienced this with all of you. So thank you so much.
Hi, my name is Linda Behar. Like everybody else here, I want to thank you, Rahel, Catherine, and the university, and for having us here. I think so that the experience has been fantastic. I'm very honored to be part of this group of artists. I was born in Venezuela. I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself, my work, and my technique, because I think so as an artist for myself, part of the technique that I use is important in my process. That means that I was born in Venezuela. I have raised in a community that was very important to have a formal education. I graduated as a civil engineer because for my family it was important to have a formal career. And after I get married, I decided to change and follow my passion and becoming an artist. For many, many years, I was working with glass casting. And around 10 years ago, I decided, and in 2000, I moved to the United States. I have 2 daughters and a fantastic family. And in 2000, I moved to the United States. And as I started working as a glass caster in the University of Miami, teaching some workshop. And in 2008, I'm working with a few galleries. And in 2008, when was the recession, all my work with galleries and everything was closing completely. That means that I was questioning myself what to do now. That means that I decided to get back to the university. And I did my master in concentration printmaking in Florida Atlantic University. And in the process of doing my master in my older age was a completely an amazing experience, because it was an experience that questioned myself why I'm doing art. We are producing objects constantly, producing images, and question yourself what is your purpose in life as an artist. It makes you think deeply about what were we doing. That means that about the technique that I'm using, I'm working in printmaking using technology. I do all my work in the computer. I work with video game software to create the woman bodies, and also I work in Photoshop, and also I combining with traditional printmaking. After I make all my images, I connect my computer to a laser cutting machine where I create my plates, and I use those plates sometimes in acrylic, in wood, and in different materials to print and make my images. That means that I printing in a traditional way, inking, and using a traditional press to create it. And the process, for me, is very important because it's a long process, and in the way of finishing the final piece, make me think in reverse sometimes, and maybe plan, because this is a technique that you need to plan before you start it, because you cannot figure it out in the middle. Maybe my brain works that way, but that process helped me create my work. I've been working lately in the concept of the woman body. For me, at the beginning, was important to try to make a point about the sizing and make a statement about we are not objects, that we are humans, and our body has different shapes. And at the beginning, I was working with that concept, trying to use different shapes to send the message that we are not objects. After I was working with that, I used a video game software, if I tell you, to create those bodies. And I realized that this software has poses for female and poses for male. And I was saying like, wow, how can be incredible that this is a 21st century software, and the poses is not just the body, it's an attitude of life. If you have a pose like is very submissive, with your head tilted and your arm crossed, you will behave submissively. And this is what intrigued me about the idea of that software and the way that they were using poses. That means that I started creating bodies, different shapes, with male poses. And it's a contrast because they look different than usually the woman is represented in art. In art, usually the woman is represented very submissive and very in a sexy way, that men's or sensual way that can be sexual appealing. And my women are more stronger and using their body to feel confident with themselves. Working with the woman body and the poses, I always trying to empowering women and to create these stories behind. The work that I am showing in the gallery right now is to honor 5 million women that in 2019 march for human rights, make a line to protest for their own rights in India, and they make 385 miles. There is news, we've seen so many news, but the news that we need to hear about the effort that every human being or everyone trying to fight for their own rights sometimes get loose in the media. And for me, it was important to honor them and to be present. for that work that I am showing in the gallery, I want to recreate or to try to bring their culture to my work. And I'm using the colorful way that I think so, or I was feeling that Indian culture using an amount of textiles, an amount of colorful. And the work that is in the gallery is trying to represent their culture and to honor them. Many people yesterday was asking me about how I made them, because, and I'm just going to make you short about how I made it. I usually in printmaking, each color is a plate. Each print, it has 3 colors. That means I'm using 3 different plates for each print, and each image is composed by 2 prints. One print I cut it vertically, and the other one is cut or horizontal, and both images are waved to create one image. And the idea of sometimes question about the technique of printmaking. Printmaking was a technique that was made for reproduction, and I always try to think about how this technique can go further in the 21st century. You know, how we can take something that with a button can be printed to another level. That means that in this case, each print is unique because it's combined by 2 prints, that even the 2 prints are never the same, because the way that I'm inking is I start with a lighter color and I've been adding color every time that I'm inking. That means that in 3 layers plus adding another 3 layers, it's very hard that I have 2 images exactly the same. This is all about my work, and thank you again, and I pass the mic.
So I have to admit that as an art historian, seated with these incredible makers and artists, I feel a little bit like an interloper of sorts. But I'm incredibly excited to be here today sharing this space with you and to talk about uncovered spaces, which hopefully not only uncovered but opened up new spaces. And so for me as an art historian, my research centers firmly in the field of African American art, and I have a very vested interest in telling and uncovering and exploring the art histories of Black women artists. And what I want to say, as by way of thank you as a scholar, as a historian, is to the incredible lengths that the UTRGV and IMAS community and staff has done to document the activities today. You know, I'm struck by all of the pieces of ephemera or ways in which we have photographers and interviews happening, and thinking about how in the exhibition there's so much new work that's very recent as performed for the first time yesterday, and to think about the ways in which art history is written and how valuable all of the documentation that's happening for this event will be to scholars in the future who are going to be working, I can tell, on all of the artists seated here today, and the significance of this particular exhibition in drawing attention to their work and to the conversations that their pieces have with each other. So I have a bunch of questions to ask all of you, so I'll hand it over to Zach to talk more about the piece that he has. But
hello. Hi, I'm Zach Thompson. I wanted to say thank you as well to Catherine Rahaway for curating, directing this. I would say for any young artists who are curious how you get opportunities like this, I would say for me, it is relationships. I met Rahaway in 2019, and here we are. Never thought this would be a thing. So it really is, for me, cultivating friendships. I'm like honored to be included in this amazing cast of like artists. Also Catherine, my fellow Pisces queen, like just be generous and kind, and like this is my favorite part about being an artist, is the relationships with people and getting to talk about my work and also meet people. So for me, you know, I kind of quick background about me. I live in Brooklyn. I was born in Colorado, grew up mostly in Florida. Growing up, my parents have been evangelical missionaries for decades. So the home that was created for me did not make a lot of space for gender difference, for sexuality difference, for artists. I unfortunately am all of those things. So I am queer, I'm an artist, I'm a drag performer, I'm non-binary, my pronouns are they, them. So kind of all of that, the traditionalist world my parents made for me growing up felt much too small. So a lot of my work is about how can I playfully expand the normative structures around gender, family, and home that I experienced. And I do that mostly through a combination of drawing, performance, photography, zine making, drag. So the photos you'll see, I have a video work in the show, but I also was lucky enough, and it was like my pure joy, to get the men's bathroom and the women's bathroom at the museum to do site-specific installations in both. And so in both of those, you'll see site-specific wall drawings, and then also photographs, which are, a few of these are on the screen right now. But all the photographs are my best friends, lovers, my queer family. I take them all with a disposable camera because it's unassuming. I am obsessed with the old French classic photographers like Bresson, Doisneau, like Lartigue. They just captured moments of life. And for me, I strive to do the same, except the friends and family I'm capturing are so queer, and I'm obsessed with them. And so the photographs in the bathrooms are metal prints that are adhered to the wall so they're durable enough to be in a space like that. And all of them, I mean, the friends are like my rock stars. Like Shannon, the two photos on the top, both are my friend Shannon. She's a chameleon, and she's just unabashedly queer, the angriest Aries you'll ever meet. But also, she just plays with her looks, with performance, with gender. Everyone in the photographs in the bathrooms, I am like constantly like in awe of their ability to play, slip, and slide, and bend what it means to be a body in the world. And so much of what they do is challenging and going against this gendered binary that is so prevalent in our culture. And to me, inspired me and proved to me that there's other ways to exist in the world, that there's a vast range of possibilities to be a human in the world, despite being male or female. So the photographs, I got the privilege to put them in the bathrooms. I also think having them in the bathroom spaces, talking about uncovered spaces, also like what is an uncovered space, what is this border? For me, I think about the men's and women's bathrooms as an uncovered space. It's also like a border. It's a border between two binaries. And so kind of blurring that, and also in bathrooms there's a sense of privacy. Growing up, it was the only room in the house I was allowed to lock the door without getting in trouble from my mom. So I think, and it's my hope that people will spend more time looking, feel more comfortable, maybe feel a little bit more vulnerable to pay attention to the photographs because they are in a bathroom. It's away from the main space. No one's looking at them looking. So that's part of it. And then, yeah, I'd say too, the irony of it is that visitors to the museum will only see half of the installation, you know, unless you're like sneaking around and doing both. But
I went into both.
yeah, unless you're a rebel. But yeah, so I'd say that is kind of general background about my work, and thank you all so much.
Thank you all. I thought we could open up the conversation to anyone online or here. Let me. Okay. Let me. I'm not like talking on my back. Queens.
Do you want the microphone?
Yeah, I'm okay. Well, I just wanted to open up the conversation to anyone in the audience or online on Zoom. If anybody wanted to ask any questions to get started, or Raheli and I can also ask questions to kind of get the conversation started. But I first wanted to invite anyone that wanted to ask a question, if they would like to take the floor. I feel like we've been talking so much that I wanted to welcome you all to speak. So yes, thank you so much, Raja.
Okay.
Do you want the mic?
Yes. I think can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I think I'm fine. Again, it's a great honor to be in front of all of you guys, all of you artists, and to be talking with you and walking around with you all over the place. Okay, so I wanted to ask, when you're making your art pieces or whatever you make, art performance or your piece, do you think of, is it constantly, like, are you always thinking about the audience, like how I'm going to satisfy the audience when I'm making my art, or are you just making it for you?
I'm gonna answer first because I have my. No! I mean, I tried for a really long time to make work for a specific audience, specifically the evangelical world I left, to try to make work for them, to educate them. And I realized when I let that go and started making work about my community and the queer people in my life, I became so much happier doing that. So no, you don't have to think about the audience that way, I don't think.
For me, I always try to think about, that I want to communicate an idea. That means that, yes, I think about the audience. I don't think that I want to please them, but if I want to communicate an idea, I need to consider the audience as part of my work. That means that sometimes you use aesthetic, sometimes you use color, or sometimes what is the message that I want to send. And yes, sending for me the message is very important. That I mean that sometimes I think about the audience because they want them to understand.
I think there's a real balancing act between, I was saying that last night the performance was more ceremony than theater, which means in one way we weren't thinking about the audience, but in the other way we spent quite a bit of time placing the bodies in space very carefully. So the aesthetic decisions, the formal decisions, yeah, I'm thinking about the history of art, I'm thinking about, all of those things are about viewership, but it's not about pleasing. It's not about making a specific audience happy. It is about trying to think about the lineage of something, how it functions, how it's going to present, how it's going to read. Yeah, I'm thinking about audience in that way, but not in a way like I have to please someone in particular, if that makes sense. So there's kind of a balance that's happening.
That's a really good question. I think it makes us all try to think about our role as artists, and I think I play different roles at different times. Sometimes I do work. All right, my chair keeps going all the way back, sorry. Sometimes I do work as an artist just for myself. I'm a solo producer, but I also work in community, of course, as a social engaged artist. And those worlds are not separate, but we do work with different perspectives at different times. I do. I think in today's world, it's really important that we see ourselves as citizens of the world, as responsible artists that have the opportunity to make such a difference, and to try to work with communities to, create new futures and deconstruct and construct. And so I think it's really important that we do acknowledge our audience very directly. I think as an artist myself, I see opportunities to make connections with communities, with audience members, with institutions, with government entities, with other artists, communities at large, as part of the whole process, right? So it's always about relationship building and community building. And, you know, we were talking to some of the students today about the different places within an art process where art can happen, right? So in the space of the artist and where we're working with our ideas, in the space of the process of making something, or in the space of actually connecting with an audience or a community, right? Those are three very different spaces where meaning can happen and art can happen. But then it's like, what happens to an exhibition after it's presented? In this case, this is the most important part, right? We're starting a dialogue and we want the issues that are raised in our work to continue to build those relationships and create even more dialogue moving forward. So I would say it's central concern, you know, for us to always think about our audience and how we can make relationships and further that conversation.
Okay, great question, thank you. I was feeling like I'm at the opposite end of the spectrum over here from Zach, so I'm like, I think about the audience a lot. But I also think of the audience as potential participants. So like the piece that's in the show here is a little bit different from some of the other projects that I work on where like it literally doesn't exist, maybe similar to kind of your process. It doesn't really exist without actual like material that's given to me from other people. And some other projects are really literally about creating visibility, particularly for queer people. And so it's hard to talk about visibility, I think, without an audience. So I feel like I sort of have to consider the audience in a way, at least as like, how do I lure them? How do I get them to then, like the ultimate goal is like, learn about this person that you might not otherwise consider or learn about. So I have to get them in, you know, give them a treat or something, or like here's a visual like eye cookie so you can like, you want to figure out more, or like it's shiny, or it's, so I think I'm trying to figure out how like the audience can be more like implicated in the process and become a participant, and then like take that home with them too. So yeah, I think I care about getting like that relationship maybe.
I think that question of audience strikes me just thinking about what happened last night and the way in which the audience that was assembled last night at IMAS, and hopefully those who will be there as the show is up, were engaging with the work in different ways, and thinking about how all of the works that you all were exhibiting, and even the way in which you were just describing both your processes, the sort of impetus behind the works, and also answering Raja's question, was that the work invites an audience's engagement that perhaps is surprising. I think we were talking last night about the performance piece, and all of a sudden individuals were walking through the river walk, and I was like, oh, was that on purpose? Did you want that to happen, or did that sort of spur? Or even thinking about your work, Erica, in that I remember standing with you and another student had asked, well, did it hurt, that sort of, and wanting to understand that sense of touch, or Zach with your work in the bathroom and being a safe space to look and to get close, and how these works are encouraging different levels of an audience engagement that perhaps couldn't have been anticipated when the work was being produced, but once it's in a space, it takes on sort of a life of its own.
That's interesting. Okay, we have a question from Nidia. Would you? I think you might.
Yeah, I had a question for Margarita. So how do you gather the people for your community projects? I know like Jana, for example, stepped into our classrooms and asked us if we wanted to be a part of the performance pieces. It was a question directed to you. Yeah.
Okay, I'll take the microphone.
Yeah.
Sure.
It looks like you guys might have a question in Zoom too.
Yes, I'll read those after Margaret.
Okay, thank you for that question. And I think in sort of like continuing with my last comment, my answer, I think, you know, creating audience and thinking about community as central to a work of art is so important. I think beyond just thinking about the audience, it's also important to understand the empowerment that an art industry can offer a community. Almost a life-saving experience in many instances, a way to share histories that are not always valued or acknowledged, but that are part of our shared American history. And so with that said, I usually will come into a community that I'm invited to work with, and I will immediately meet with local organizations that are providing services to immigrant communities, because it is really important to acknowledge the work that's already being done on the ground in a particular city, and acknowledge the efforts and the wisdom and the knowledge of that effort, and try to complement the community that's already involved for decades and decades, right? So working with them to try to reach the communities that they work with is the first thing we do. We have roundtables, presentations of the project, what it represents, and what we envision, and then so we plant, a seed, an opportunity to collaborate, and then we have discussions that then lead to meeting different community members that are interested in participating. It's always on a volunteer basis, and something that they choose to do themselves. But it is by way of the grassroots movements that are already in place. And I think that's very important for community, social community work, right, as artists to come in and building from what's already there, and also allowing for the time in the space that's necessary for the relationships to build and the trust to build amongst the communities that are going to participate. So that's kind of moving along a little bit with the answer, but yes, so it's working with the local communities, establishing an open space, a safe space, and then being able to share the experience together.
Can I see the question?
Yeah, that's how we do it.
She had a question, maybe Catherine.
Go ahead. Okay. Go ahead. Do you want to just ask, or do you want the mic? Sure.
Talk too loud. Thank you for coming. Okay. So I guess my question is, before you start a series or a body of work, like this work or any, like maybe after this work, since you finished this work, where do you draw your inspiration for your ideas? Whether, I don't know if it's like news or books or, I don't know, I'm just curious. You want this?
The question was, where do we get inspiration from after this? Like, if we're going back to our studios or wherever? I don't know. I think for me, so much of my inspiration comes from like the people in the community I surround myself with, whether it's friends. I think so much part of my creative practice is just how can you live a creative life. I don't think you need to necessarily have a studio space or make paintings or like do a certain thing that would qualify you as an artist. I think so much of what I love doing is just trying to be present in life and try to play with as many things that come up in the world and surround myself with friends that are down to explore and experiment and play with me. And through that playing, generative ideas come out. I don't know.
While I'm not a maker, the inspiration that I find is coming to exhibitions and looking and just allowing myself to look and look freely and to not, so seeing things and listening, like you all are listening here, is where ideas come for the work that I do.
Well, for me, I'm just looking at the world constantly. There is always a news that hit me. There is something that I want to tell that it had not been said. There is some image that is clicking on my head and suddenly I have an idea. That means that I think so that that kind of creativity is like how the people are doing some sport. More muscle you have, more building you have, suddenly easily it gets. That means that more you use your creativity, more ideas come to you. And I think so they are coming because you just see something that is clicking, or you see a book, or you find an Instagram post, and you suddenly say like, wow, I need to say something about that. That means that, but I think so that it's very important that you need to place yourself as an artist in the world. What I want to say. That is the most important thing. When you know what you want to say, you find the ideas come to you.
I think right now the subject matter is one thing, right? So subject is subjective and it changes over time. I think themes are things that probably all of us could say have always been present in our work, from even as from children to adults, right? So I think there are overarching themes, and then I think there are kind of individual subjects. But I would say that for me, following an impulse, following an inspiration, not worrying necessarily about where it's going to lead or what it's going to do, not worrying about it out there, but being really honest about the investigation of following is a big part of how ideas come. Because I think sometimes I've noticed that there have been chapters in my life where I'm like, the work is really ego-driven and I'm driving it. And now I feel more like I'm in a position where it's driving me, and my job is to literally to follow and to notice. And I think that, like what Linda is saying, is that the more that we are active, the more that we are able to make the connections, that we are able to recognize that this next to this is art and this over next to this is not, right? Like, I think it's a muscle, and so just work, you know, work comes from work.
I believe that my inspiration comes from different places. I think when I made the decision to work in community and with others, my work changed and it became, you know, it just had a different sensibility. It became a little bit more honest and more truthful in relation to the themes that I was addressing. I am very interested in immigration histories, border histories. I myself, I'm an immigrant. I grew up in Mexico City. I migrated to the United States. So I have a bicultural experience that is just inherent part of who I am. I think biculturally. My language is bicultural. So 2 languages, 2 countries, you know, it's like you can slice everything in half for me, and I just function that way. And I make amends with that, you know, constantly. So that's a place where I draw this like bicultural identity. It's very important to me. So I reflect on it from different perspectives, but also just understanding my place in the world is important as an artist. The voice that I have, the platforms that are there for us to express ourselves I don't take those lightly. I don't, I'm very, very conscious of my privilege as a person that has a voice and can communicate important issues that reflect my experience and others' experience, right? Which is so important, so vital that we see the power of the arts in this way, especially today. But I also will say that there are moments, you know, when I'm in my studio and right now I'm working with, you know, some cochinilla wash dye work that involves a lot of water, movement of water, and then all of a sudden there's this personal connection to this material, and it's just inspiring to me. in a more spiritual way, you know, an intimate way. So I listen to those moments too for inspiration, and there's whole bodies of work that are developing just from that moment, that experience, right? And so, but also the other thing I'll say, and this will be the last thing, is when I'm invited to do a commission or a public artwork or a community work that is a new work, I will make sure that, you know, I understand the space that the work is going to live in, the community that I'm going to create it with, of course. So inspiration from the history of the land and the relationships that are built with the community to make the work. So, for, you know, I think I get inspiration from a lot of different places. So I'm grateful for that.
Yeah, I think I actually get inspiration from a lot of different sources, like you all have really mentioned too. I was literally going to say work comes from work, and so it's not even just like the exercise of that muscle, it's looking and responding, like even in like making the shirt, it's like, not the shells, it's invisible, invisibility, you know, just like look at what's happening in front of you, like in the in-between moments before it's finished too, like that's something that's happening. And I think we're always looking, like art is hard, like we're working all the time, like even right now, I think, you know, we're all gonna walk away and like realize that we're thinking about things and we're making connections and like we're constantly on, and in a way, like what a gift. But you know, it can be just gardening and like struggling with the blackberry branches and like, wouldn't you know, now I've got like a little container full of tiny little thorns. I don't know what I'm going to do with them, but it's like, oh, you're like, this is painful. What does that mean? It's a material that like causes me to feel something. So, but like, keep a storage chest of these things. You know, like all of these ideas and materials are just like, I'll use it later. I'll figure it out later. And sometimes I even like, I feel like I have a kind of an idea safety net. I have this list of ways to live forever, because most of my work is in some way dealing with mortality, or how to not deal with it. And so I'm like, give me an idea, and maybe I'll try it later. And so I feel like I as if it were possible, like I never want to run out of an idea, because it like wakes me up in the morning. Like that's why I get out of bed. Like I don't know, maybe because I don't have kids or something, but you know, I'm like, I must finish the work. I must do the work, and but I feel like you have to nurture that too. You know, like even if it's not sitting there on the like tip of your tongue, it's like I'll go back to my chest of ideas and my, you know, studio full of materials, and it will be there, like waiting for me. But I have to go and I have to like mess with those materials and mess with those ideas and put the work in. So yeah, that's all the things.
So the answer.
I am very happy to see people that think like me, because usually you see yourself as a different person, but when you hear everybody talking, I say like, wow, I'm not the only one that's thinking that way.
Okay, hi. Do you have Regina yet, or Regina, or Gabriella? Okay, we want to do Gabriella and then Regina, or?
Sure. It kind of piggybacks off of what we've been talking about. Yeah, I can just, I guess, ask about the mic. But
Do you want it? Do you want the mic?
Oh no, I think I'm hear me.
Yeah.
It's okay. I can project. I'm loud. I'm sorry. But I haven't really figured out how to ask this question, but I'm interested in the relationship between each artist's medium and then like the topics that you work with. You know, because like for example, there are two textile artists here, but you work very differently with textiles. Or like Linda, you said you work with like the video game software. Yeah, I mean, each of you said like very interesting things, as well as, you know, Rebecca, like you're a writer, you're an art historian. So yeah, I would just love to hear more about that, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
The relationship between medium and
So for the first one.
Hoi. That's a tough question. I mean, for me, I like to play a lot with different mediums. So I think for me, photography is a huge one. like I can kind of say that photography is kind of the base of, you know, most of my drawings are based off of photography. The performances I'm doing, I'm thinking of it through like a photography lens. Like the drag shows that I go to all the time, I'm constantly thinking of capturing moments. I think for me, like, yeah, photography is like one way to see the world. It's like drawing is another way to see the world or to communicate with the world. I think with photography, I got into it because my dad was into it and I was like a little kid and started doing it and just fell in love with it. And then I fell in love with looking at images all the time of different photographers. And then it became really important for me to figure out how can I capture moments and be participant in spaces like drag shows, but be present. Because I think there's so much of an emphasis on phones, and everyone's on their phone, they're at a concert, they're looking at their phone, they're not like paying attention. So for me, that's why I chose to stick with disposable cameras. Because it's boom, done, it's away. It's also plastic, lightweight, people don't expect you to actually get developed. So like people forget about it, they're more candid, they're more open. I see other photographers at drag shows, a lot of them are like documenting for the show or whatever, but it's like, they're intrusive. They have a big lens, like people know who they are. When I'm there, I have a drink in one hand, dollar bills in the other, I'm going woo-hoo, I see a moment and I pull the camera out and snap it and it's gone, and I'm back in the moment. And it also became a way for me to contribute back to the queer community. Because so much of my friends and like who I love, like I came to New York not knowing anyone, and I would go to bars by myself. Having a camera gave me a purpose. So it made it easier for me to go up to beautiful queens or performers and ask them, hey, can I take your photo? Because what queen doesn't want her photo taken? So for me, like that medium became a way to build friendships. And then when I would develop them and get them back, I started to create a visual language for myself and how I photographed. And then sharing those online, Instagram is a huge promoter and a business tool for a lot of queers and performers. So to be able to capture moments that were meaningful or unique or special on film, share them with them, they reshare them as posters for their next event. It was my way of not just being an onlooker and a taker, but how can I contribute in a way that feels good for me? Like how can I contribute back to the community and give back? And for me, photography has been that vehicle, mostly. So that's how it kind of works for me.
That's very good. Your words are your medium.
Great answer.
Yeah, I mean, you know, well, what's fascinating to me right now is that I'm teaching, and I thank you for all the students who are here at such a busy time in the semester. I feel that way also. And in my class right now, which is entitled Women Artists 1850 to the Present, we're in the last module that I've titled Mediums and Messages. So the question was really apt because it was thinking about the various ways in which artists are choosing mediums to help convey the messages or help to engage with the certain communities that they're in, and thinking about how that gets expressed in different ways and that different choices might lead to different levels of engagement or different ways in which the concept is conveyed. So it's really exciting for me to hear that you all explain sort of how those choices match up as someone who's looking at the work, making my own ideas about why I think the mediums might match with the messages. So.
Well, as I was explaining, the media that I use is very important for me. But at the end, I think so, that as an artist, you have a safe net. That is your media. You know you are a good drawing, you are a good photographer, something come natural, or you are a master in ceramics, and this is your safe place. But you start there, but never need to end there. Because as an artist today, you can start in a media that you feel comfortable to communicate something, and you see like, that can look great in a photography, or that can look great in a sculpture or proposal, or it can look great in plastic, or whatever, or performance that you want to do. That means that, yes, I think so that artists, we have a safe net that can be the drawings, or it can be the computer, or it can be the technique that we are mastering, but that can be developed to any other media that you feel that you can use it in the future. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm always asking questions about what is the appropriate form for an idea. I'm trained as a letterpress printer and as a printmaker. And so there's a philosophy that comes with that training that has to do with democracy, accessibility, shared space. There's a philosophical premise that I feel like goes to the root of my work, whether it's in printmaking or not. I haven't made a print and I don't know how long, but that philosophy stays with me. But for this work about ancestry, it's a question about ephemerality. And that's also something that's really important to me. So how do you communicate something that's so ephemeral, something that you can't actually touch, something that you can't grasp, that's fleeting? So what are some of the ways that we can communicate that fleetingness? And so in these two works, those were some of the questions, and then also what happens when you involve a community of people who you don't know, who you're asking to trust you, and you're creating something together. In a way you have to create something that is easy, something that has very simple directions, but also something that you can predict will be beautiful. And we did that together, all of us.
Yes.
But, I'm constantly asking, how? And if this idea is in this medium, what will it look like? If it's in this medium, what will it look like? And so, even though I'm trained in something, I have no marriage to it, except for philosophically.
Materials, I think, are so important. Who asked this question? Yes, there you are. I think they are, they have their own meaning, their own history. In the works that I make, I'm just thinking of, some in my mind right now. I'm thinking of guns as material that I worked with, and uniforms, clay, some craft materials like, embroidery, of course, and papel picado processes. I also think about stories as a medium. So those are really important, central to the community work that I do. And they're almost like casting mechanisms, right? Stories that can help us cast a future, but also break down the past and understand the present. So they're just different ways in which I consider materials, media, and process as an artistic creation. But I would say ultimately there's a very strong connection to the themes that are being addressed, and it is for me it's like it's really sometimes it starts with the theme, sometimes it starts with the material or a social issue that is being addressed, and we figure out ways to represent it in clear and thoughtful means. So I think that's my answer. Yeah, just pair it up. It's always paired up with the subject matter. It's always paired up with the process, and along with materials, storytelling is really important too.
So I only recently started identifying as a textile artist. I like lots of different kinds of materials, whatever, because of the meaning that's embedded in it or the history that comes with it. But I've stuck with it for a while, because almost everything is textiles. And also there's an accessibility about it. So you can teach it pretty quickly. You don't need a lot of equipment to do most processes. So there's something you can bring it to other people, you can take it with you, you can, be mobile with it. But, I mean, apart from that, I think I want to kind of draw a line of connection here, because I think one of the aspects that I really enjoy about the exhibition is it's not media specific. And so to kind of answer your question about like the connection between the materials, at least like everyone that's sitting here, I think that like in some way we're all using our media to talk about transformation, and even the title, like an uncovered space, it's something that happens to that space, right? There's a change, it's uncovered. And so whether we are embodying it, documenting it, or asking for it, that's something that I've noticed, like all of our investigations are doing in some way.
Good point. Regina, did you have a question?
It was very simple. I feel like that was such a strong question. It was mostly because I felt connected to when you were saying that you feel that your art at some point was egotistical. And I feel it has changed for me, like the pandemic has changed a lot of the way that I think about many different stuff and the way that I carry myself and communicate. So I was just wondering if the pandemic has changed your practice. It's much more simple.
Isn't it? That sounds pretty complicated. Should we start in the middle?
Yes, you started that side. Side, no? They started the other side. Oh, yes, exactly.
Yeah.
In some ways, it hasn't fundamentally changed the way that I work. I think now more than ever, and I felt myself inching in this direction. Now that I've actually found a permanent home somehow during the pandemic, also wanting to figure out how to, this is something that Rahel and I were actually talking about very recently, how does my work connect to the communities, the specific communities in which I live? And so what can I literally give back? More so than just starting conversations, like how can my skills be put to better use, which was hard to do as a relatively transient person. So in a way that's kind of allowed me to sort of, I don't know, commit to that question and to a specific place. I live in Asheville, North Carolina, so they don't know what's coming for them, but no.
I think the pandemic definitely has impacted a lot of us in very powerful ways. I think, so I function in different ways as artist, teacher, organizer, mother, and I think in all those areas there's been a transformation for me. Artistically, I think just having to live in different types of spaces, like and being just in one small home and being sort of like forced to stay there without being able to go out or being careful, risking your health, everybody else's, having to deal with that experience, I think, made me be creative and innovative in the ways that I communicate out, and I communicate with others, and in the ways that I make my art. So the sort of alternative spaces and alternative realities in which we had to figure out how to exist and survive, I think that has translated directly into the work I'm doing with one project I'm working on right now. And it's a sculptural piece, and there's an installation, but then there's also a digital component where you can only enter that space through your smartphone, for instance. Probably that wouldn't have happened had I not had to imagine, this new existence. I also teach online and in person, so it's also how do you communicate something very physical, studio ideas, or dialogue through Zoom, all these things we had to figure out. I think definitely for me it has been transformative. So not only in the physical aspect of making something in the work, but also in the subject matter. We have learned so much more now about the inequities that exist in the world due to this pandemic, right? And the injustices that are affecting our most vulnerable communities. And so it's even more important now that we are putting a lens and a voice to these issues. So I think that definitely has charged me with more responsibility and informed my work in that way as well. Yeah, that's good.
I'll just talk about physical challenges of with the pandemic, because in the spring of 2020, I was working on a performance work with a group of dancers, and we had been doing community research for like 3 years, and we had a performance scheduled, you know, in a big public space, and it was canceled, of course, and so. You know, we had a big decision to make. This was many years of research. There were a lot of people who were depending on income from working on the project because we'd written a lot of grants. And so there was like questions of livelihood, of, you know, not wanting to just drop the ball because then no one would get paid. And so, you know, speaking of like responsibility, when we're engaging a lot of people, often we have to think about like, well, what if they don't get the paycheck that's associated with this work? So we quickly raised a little bit more money, hired a videographer, changed the entire way that we were planning this performance, pivoted to video, made sure that we were socially distanced. I mean, we were working with dance, and the nature of dance is touch. And also the work was about weight. And so much of dance is about how the body bears weight, and we only understand that in relation between one body and another, right? And so I had built all these sculptures, and the sculptures were meant to convey this idea. So, you know, the whole thing, what it meant was that what seemed fixed in my mind of what we had developed had to change rapidly and respond to the time, and we had to work together. And in the end, I couldn't be happier with this film that we made. And it had a much larger viewership than it would have had, you know, for 2 weekends of performances, you know, live performances. Now the video is something that, you know, et cetera. But I think that's one of the things as an artist is that, you know, we can't ever let anything stop us from creating the work, getting the message out, responding quickly, responsibly. There's always a solution, always. And sometimes we just have to engage the people around us to figure out how to respond, you know, most equitably.
I think so that the question is very good, because the COVID year had been affecting us in so many ways. Each of us can say something about personally can affect us punctually in one aspect of our work, but it's a great question because we can talk about this for the next day and end of the day. Personally, for me, if I need to choose one of the subjects and bring it to the conversation, for me was the timing. What is the meaning of timing? My question was constantly, when this is gonna end? Time. Suddenly, my life was full of trips, and my life was constantly break from one point to another. And I say at the beginning, wow, I'm gonna be here in my studio whenever, whatever, for the time that I want. That is fantastic. I'm gonna engage in the harder projects that I can imagine because I have endless time. And this work that I show in the exhibition was part of that endless time because it's very, very, very a long time that it takes me to make them, because I need to cut the paper, I need to weigh them, buy one, let them dry. That means that if I am talking about something that made me think about what is about timing, I choose many projects on my creation that were like so time consuming. Purposely to slow down my creative process and to make my life harder and to find some challenge in very educated way. That means that if I need to say something, is time. What was the time for me?
I think that what it brought to the front for me was a question that I pose to my students now, and I'll pose to all of you, is what is it, do you think of yourselves as living through history? Because I think that for me, that's what as someone whose work is really rooted in the mid-20th century, to think about all of the work that's coming out, that will continue to come out, that will emerge, that everyone here has been working on in their studios. But to think about what does it mean to be living through history, and what does it mean that it took a global pandemic for maybe some of us to realize that the events that we're experiencing are history, and how can we document that, and think about what materials you might save or encounter that will become part of this archive that is the COVID years. So for me as a scholar, that's sort of what it raised for me in my practice of scholarship is, I'm living through this moment. What do I need to save from this moment now that I'll, come back to?
Yeah, the 2020 panini that we all lived through was a real doozy for me. But that was in New York City, so that was crazy. Like, nightlife gone. Like, all of my friends, had jobs. We're performing, drag, everything, it shifted. I will say what beautifully came out, that was some of the most iconic Instagram Live drag shows I've ever seen, which was fantastic. The creativity of seeing my friends deal with that and still find a way to make coin and perform was really inspiring. For me personally, my mental health had never been worse during that time. I couldn't leave or go anywhere. So it really was the worst time of my life, but looking back, it was also some of the best. It forced me to deal with unresolved trauma that was having to come up. It forced me to learn how to sit still, how to be patient, how to put care and time into my environment, my room. It became an art project to me. It is a mirror of my values now. I also think a lot of the photos I was taking during that time shifted to the intimacy between my roommate and our close friends. And I think they're some of the best photos I've taken. So it was a whirlwind. It's still not over, but it definitely changed. But I think so much of it is, as artists, we are problem solvers, and the resiliency we have innately within ourselves, but also within the communities we are part of, is the way I could get through it.
Oh, great question. Good answer. Yes, go ahead, Alexis.
First of all, talking about time and space, I can't tell you how much I appreciated having you all in my space with each and all of your energy. It was really great to have you there amongst my brain mash. And it was really beautiful to experience all of you in that space. I'm curious to know, you all are in our space. You all are here in this time and in this place. What are you going to take back with you? I mean, obviously you've got all of this beautiful stuff. I mean, I know when I go to new places, creative energy just, we're always thinking, working, taking something. We're artists, we give, but we take as much so that we can continue to give back. So I want to know, what did we give you?
That is a good question.
I
have to
start. I'll start because I feel like I've had the privilege of spending the most time here.
Yeah.
And I'll say that immediately what you have given me is a much more nuanced understanding of this region of our country. And it's something I'm profoundly grateful for, because the first night that I arrived here, and I think that some of us have had this conversation, that the way that the media, even the well-meaning liberal media, the way that it portrays Texas, and particularly the border region, has no nuance. It has the same note, it has the same tone. It is absolutely wrong and rude, and so even if you're a well-meaning person, you might arrive here having no understanding of the complexity of the history, the generational history, the history of how people navigate this random political line that is drawn between these two spaces where families are navigating. And so I would say that the thing that I have taken away is a more nuanced understanding. It's a very, I understand that it's a surface level, but I feel like it has already changed some of the conversations that I have had in my community with my family, because I think that the stereotypes that the media portray become ingrained in the way that people talk about a place. And particularly, you know, I mean, I live in the South, I live in Nashville, I have family in New York, I have family in DC. They don't have a very nuanced understanding of where I live, and they're perfectly happy. I mean, sorry, I love you guys, but there are a lot of stereotypes of the South. And I think that as artists, one of our great privileges and one of our great responsibilities is to communicate nuance. And this place is rich with nuance and rich with history. So, thank you. That's
thank you.
something that I take.
I'm just going to compliment because I feel, we've been talking and I feel precisely like Jana feel. If I take in something, it's about, I'm coming from a culture that is constantly, you know, my mother is from Morocco, my father is from Romania, I'm first generation Venezuela, I have a Jewish heritage, moved to Florida, living in New England, and you know, it's like, where do you come from? I don't know where I come from, but you know, I'm here in a place where nobody even know also where they come from. They come from here. They are from the south of Texas, the Rio Grande Valley. That means that if I take something about this beautiful experience, for me is knowing the people, the richness of the culture, the mixing race that is happening over here, that even is not happening in Dallas, because I've been in Dallas, and I've been in Austin, but it's so particularly of here, from this area, and you are amazing, the food is delicious, and I am celebrating your culture.
Thank you.
I mean, after Jana's response, I think
Yes, she said it for
everyone.
everything.
I don't,
May
you
I ask
know.
one more? Yeah, no, go ahead. Go ahead.
I see to Jana.
I think
Zach.
Yeah, I mean, I will say being here has actually been much more grounding than I expected. I grew up in the South. All of my extended family is from the South. I left for a reason, and I haven't been back to the South in like 4 years. And I will say I was a little nervous coming to South Texas, but I don't know, I've been really surprised at how at home I feel. I think I needed to leave to feel more confident in myself to come back to a place like this and actually appreciate it for what it is. So, thank you all.
That's awesome.
Thank you. I have so many takeaways. I think the most important is that there's a real sense of growth here. There's a real sense of kind of a fertile ground where ideas are sprouting and communities are coming together. I mean, especially with this center, the whole exhibition and the invitation and what the dialogue is being projected with this work that we're all putting together, and of course the reception, is the partnerships, right? The partnerships between the universities, between the students, between the museum, between the collectors, between everybody who's coming together to make this dialogue possible. You know, and in every piece is dealing with something slightly different, even though they are connected in many ways. So I think that's what I take away, is that there's something here in McAllen. There's a real proudness, there's a real connectivity between all of you, that you want to honor this community, which of course it is a very valuable community. I'm a border girl too. I mean, from El Paso, you know, so I have a lot of connections to a border town in energy and bicultural energy. So I acknowledge the effort that it takes to work with opposing energies constantly. So I think you guys are doing a fantastic job and have a great support system here, and I hope you keep going. You know, you have to keep pushing your projects, keep pushing your ideas and your artwork, no matter how much resistance you may or may not feel. I mean, the cultural history of this town is important, and you are the ambassadors of these messages and these works of art that need to become part of American history and the larger art history. So please continue and continue. And we saw so many wonderful creatives in the studio today. They're awesome. The works of art are direct, you know, they're subtle, they're direct, they're what they need to be. So I just hope you continue to follow your instinct and keep going. Can't wait to see the next exhibition that you all put together. All the students. Thank you so much.
I'll echo that. I think, yeah, my main takeaway is just having the privilege of being in your spaces. And, you know, we always feel like when we have people visit our studios that like they're like doing us the honor of making time, but it's also, like, we get to see your work and we get to learn about all of the things that you're making and doing, and you all spoke so eloquently about it, and like had just so much richness there that, you know, I was like, I'm just gonna listen because I don't like, I want to. That's why I was like trying to get your names down. Like, I need to write you back because I want to hear more. And you know, I think that happens. It's everywhere you go. You meet specific individual people, and I think at the exhibition too, people were very curious and had, you know, a lot of interesting questions, and that's also a gift that's given by your participation, and, you know, just like the individual people that we met, the individual conversations that we had with artists and even non-artists who came to, you know, just learn more about the work. So I think your curiosities are what I will take away from it, like what your research is, and also like the questions that you ask about work that isn't even your own. So yeah, I think we've all felt very welcomed here, and like happy to not just talk but to listen, because, you know, we're learning too. So thank you for that.
Thank you all so much for coming. This has just been amazing, and I wanted to invite. Sorry, camera. I wanted to invite everyone to stay and grab a bite. We have lunch catered here, and maybe you can grab a lunch and visit a little longer, any conversations you want to have, and we can continue informally. And I'd like to thank all the artists and art historians for their contributions to the catalog, to our community, and the performativity of your works is just going to continue and blossom and become even more impactful. And this truly is an amazing collaboration, and I'm honored to be a part of it and to serve y'all and serve our students and our young people, and make a difference in helping to uncover spaces. So thank you all for coming. And